Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Transformative Women Who Brought Us to Where We Are Today by Jeannine Vegh. So for this session, all sessions are going to be recorded and posted up later in a week or two. So when we are going through this session, please use the chat button if you need to and select all panelists and attendees to share any comments that you have. We will be using the chat button during this session, so be sure to click all panelists and attendees. But for all Q&A, we will be taking all questions at the end. So please use the Q&A button to have all your questions throughout the session, and we will answer those at the end. So yeah, let me introduce Jeannine. So Jeannine Vegh was born and raised in Ohio and then earned her graduate degree in counseling psychology from John F. Kennedy University in Pleasant Hill, California. She received her undergraduate degrees from Antioch University and Santa Barbara and the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles. She has been a fan of women's history since the time she was able to read a book and began writing as an adult. She is the author of a historical fiction called The Uprisers, which is about the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Her stepfather was a survivor of this war when he arrived in America that year. She was involved with the California Writers Club for 6 years. During this time, she was elected to be their secretary and their vice president. Shortly after returning to Ohio in 2010, she began the Ohio Women's History Project. As an amateur historian, she dedicates her free time to writing about our state's transformed women who brought us to where we are today. So now I will turn it over to Jeannine.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody who came today to the Ohio Local History Alliance. This is the very first, one of the very first presentations, and that I'm going to bring up here. So I hope you will enjoy this. There we go. Okay, so as Sarah said, I'm not a history professor, I'm a psychotherapist. And my hobby is reading and writing about women's history. It's a long story as to how I became a person who was really excited about history. And so it begins with why teachers matter. And I put this on here just to honor some of the teachers who impressed me the most in my academic career and who really helped to formulate my excitement about history. And so the screen the picture that you see down here at the bottom is actually Etna Elementary, where I first learned about Ohio history in the 6th grade. Right down there, if you can see the windows at the basement of this building, that's where we were at. And now, unfortunately, Amazon destroyed the school, so it's no longer there, and it makes you realize how old you really are. And then Principles in Democracy, the POD class I took with Mr. Dahlman at Watkins Memorial. Women's History was the college class that I took in Santa Barbara. And then, of course, coming back to Ohio in 2010 and starting Ohio Women's History. So, so my website is ohiowomen'shistory.com or discerninggal.com. Those are two places that I have all the information that you're going to hear about women's history. And this website was a way for me to find my niche in women's history because when I returned, nobody was tackling the topic of Ohio women's history specifically. And so I thought, well, why not? I guess I can do it. So here are some of the women that are featured on my website. Agnes Meyer Driscoll, who was a cryptologist, and you can see the historical marker at the Westerville Library on State Street. The old part of the Westerville Library is actually the house she grew up with. Well, she spent some time there. She didn't grow up there her entire 18 years, but she was there for a large part of it. And I was there for the for when they dedicated that historical marker to her, and her great nephew, I believe it was there and spoke about her. This is Irma Bombeck. I think a lot of you know and love her. She did some of her work on Good Housekeeping, and she also made some TV shows that didn't do too well, but she was very well known, and there's a writers' conference in Dayton every year that's in her memory. This is This is one of the paintings by Lily Martin Spencer. A very beautiful painter, and a lot of her paintings have some comedy in them as well, I find. This is Ella P. Stewart, who was the first Black pharmacist. And this is Helen Beatrice Davis, who I just wrote about recently, who is a teacher and an activist here in Ohio. And then we have our beloved Jerry Mock, who was the first woman to fly around the world alone. We're going to be getting some, her granddaughter, Rita Mock Pike, is going to be a guest writer on my website very shortly. And Rita is getting ready to produce and direct The Flying Housewife, which is going to be about Jerry. So that's going to be a really exciting thing to look forward to. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and I have a Facebook page and a group called Ohio Women in History, which is for your moms and grandmas. So go on there and write some stuff on there. So next we're going to do a pop quiz, and this is where I want you to go into the chat box, which I can't see. Oops. This is where I want you to go to the chat box and write down some women, name 10 women who are in history that are not celebrities or first ladies. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. I'll figure out how to, here we are. Okay, we've got Eliza Archard Connor, Rosa Luxemburg, Harriet Callista McCabe, Julia Galloway Higgins. So we've got a few of them so far. We don't have 10 yet. Anybody else can quickly think of some women in history that are not celebrities or first ladies? Empress Wu Zetian, Mata Hari, yeah. Okay, great. Wonderful. Yes, some of the people I'm going to be featuring today. Shirley Emma Gatewood. Okay, so thank you for doing that quiz. That was the first thing that we did in our women's history class in Santa Barbara, the first day of school. And so it was really exciting to see how much we didn't know, but by the end of the by the end of the semester, of course, we certainly knew a lot more women. So thanks for doing that fun thing and getting your juices flowing. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so what I did was I put a few on here myself. So we have Anne Frank from the Diary of Anne Frank in Holland, and Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, from France, Catherine the Great from Russia, Shirley Chisholm, who somebody mentioned, the first Black woman to run for president in the United States, Frida Kahlo, she was a Mexican painter, and a lot of people don't know that she was also part Hungarian. Clara Barton from the Civil War here in the United States, Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood here in the United States, my beloved Juliet Lowe, because I am an alumni from the Girl Scouts of America, Marie Curie, a physicist and chemist from Poland, and our beloved Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president in the USA, and also from Ohio. So today I'm going to be talking about these featured ladies: Emma Gatewood, Mildred Wirt Benson, Maud Waite, and Sarah Worthington. And as we all know, this year is our 100th anniversary to have the right to vote. So the very last person I'm going to be featuring is this lady right here, the Honorable Maud C. Waite. So I will save the suffragists for last, but I just wanted to let you know to keep an eye on that because we are going to get there. So the first person is Emma Gatewood, and she came to us in October 25th, 1887 until June 4th, 1973. And has anybody, I don't know if anybody has heard of her, but most recently she was talked about in the New York Times in their section called Overlooked No More. Overlooked No More is now a tribute to women's history obituaries because in the past only men were written about. So Emma was an Appalachian woman from Mercerville, Ohio, and she gave birth to 11 children and endured a very horrible marriage for a great many years. And I forgot to show you all the pictures here, sorry. The pictures here that you're going to see, the first one is is the book that was written about her by her nephew, Ben Montgomery. He's actually a Pulitzer Prize winner, but not for this particular book. The second picture here is a small picture of her family before she had 11 children. The third picture here is a little photograph from the Appalachian Museum, and you will be able to see these artifacts there. This picture here is the map of the walk, Grandma Gatewood's walk, which is her favorite walk in Old Man's Cave. And then this last picture here, this is her nephew, Ben Montgomery, who wrote the book, and two of her daughters. So as I was saying, she was from Mercerville, Ohio. She gave birth to 11 children and endured a very horrible marriage. She received terrible beatings that almost left her for dead a few times before she finally walked out the door and never turned back. Unfortunately, this was after all of her 11 children had grown up, so she went through quite a lot for a number of years before she finally was able to walk out the door and leave and make sure that her children were taken care of, were old enough to take care of themselves. She was a very funny woman, so when she was taking a walk, often her family had no idea when she was coming back. And this is her way of meditation, I think. But she was a very pious woman. And this time when she went on the Appalachian Trail at the age of 67, she would be gone for several months. And until coverage began to be noted in the newspaper, the family had no idea where she was walking or when she was going to return. So Emma is featured in her I said it wrong. It was her great-great-nephew, Ben Montgomery's book, Grandma Gatewood's Walks, which was the book I showed you earlier. While reading this book, I kept thinking to myself that the gods were definitely on Emma's side. Of course, walking the Appalachian Trail, which today is 2,180 miles from Maine to Georgia, or Georgia to Maine, which is the way that Grandma Gatewood walked. It's going to be fraught with a lot of obstacles today, but back in 1955, the trail was a little bit more rustic, and Emma went through several pairs of tennis shoes along the way. And when I say tennis shoes, if you can see in the picture there, she has a pair of Converse on. She also wore Keds, which was something that many of us who are in your 40s and 50s and up probably remember running around in the backyards with, but certainly not taking a hike on a trail for 2,180 miles. I myself have walked a lot shorter trails in several states, but I always use hiking boots. And I can tell you that as an older woman at 58 years old, I can't even walk now very well in hiking boots with only having one child. So I can't even imagine what it must have been like for her with 11 children in a pair of Keds or a pair of Converse. But this lady was a very, very strong woman. And that's why I think a lot of us really admire her quite a bit. And I don't know what the sleeping quarters are like now because I've never walked the Appalachian Trail myself, but I assume there's a lot more hotels along the trail or even youth hostels. But back in 1955, Emma was at the mercy of complete strangers. There's actually one incident where she was camping for the night in a lean-to, and out of nowhere came some people from, I believe was from New York, and they turned out to be ex-gang members with a minister helping to reform them. So most of the time though, Emma devised beds out of flat rocks that she slept on or other makeshift beds that nature presented her with. So quite an amazing woman. Part of the way through her journey, as I mentioned earlier, a journalist learned of her and began to write stories about her. At first, it was rather fun for her because it was unique, but then she began to get famous, and this actually got to wear her out a little bit. So she kind of started hiding from the journalist as much as she could because she got tired of it. Ben's writing captured Emma's diaries and helped you to imagine what it must be like for her to day in and day out. He also noted the weather conditions and other things that were going along during that time. Because while she was walking Hurricane Connie, which pelted Emma with many bad rains, but it was mostly behind her, thankfully. He also talked about the end of her journey being up in the mountains, and she broke her glasses, and what this must have been like to try to maneuver climbs over steep terrains. I think Emma's story is an inspiration to older women. I find that it pushes me when I'm doing my exercises not to give up so easily. So today, as I mentioned, there's a portion of Old Man's Cave, this trail here, that's called the Grandma Gatewood Trail. It's about 10 miles and it's said to be her favorite hike. When she died at 85, she had 24 grandchildren and 30 great-grandchildren. So next, we're going to talk about Sarah Ann Worthington King Peter. I learned about Sarah Worthington while taking a tour of the Adena Mansions in Chillicothe. So the pictures that we have here, this is a younger picture of her, and this is, of course, an older picture. And this one in the middle is said to be a bust that you can find of her in the Cincinnati Museum. I learned that from reading her book, the book that was written about her, but I don't know if it's still there or not. I'm assuming so. So next, I'm going to show you this lovely 3-minute video.
Thomas Worthington was a successful businessman, member of the Ohio House of Representatives, United States Senator, and Governor of Ohio. But he's probably best known as the father of Ohio statehood. He moved from Virginia to Chillicothe in 1798 and soon became a leader in the community. Adena was the name he gave to his 2,000-acre estate. His mansion was designed by Henry Latrobe, who is considered to be the first professional architect in America. Latrobe was also the architect of the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The mansion was completed in 1807. It's one of the few designed by Latrobe that's still standing. Today, the mansion sits on 300 acres of the original estate and is open to the public. Guided tours allow you to learn a lot about the home, the Thomas Worthington family, and life in the early 1800s. Inside, the mansion looks much the way it did when the Worthingtons lived there. You'll even see many original Worthington family furnishings. In addition to being a home, Adena also served as a meeting place for notable dignitaries of the day, including the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. Outside, you can stroll the formal gardens and see the 5 outbuildings. It's said that the view of Mount Logan from Adena was the inspiration for the Great Seal of the state of Ohio. The seal has been modified several times over the past 200 years, but still mostly resembles the original. Thomas Worthington died in 1827 and was originally buried at Adena. But later he was reinterred at the Grandview Cemetery in Chillicothe. In addition to the mansion, outbuildings, and gardens, a Museum of Education Center was built with many interactive displays. An emphasis was placed on relating the personal stories of people who were connected to Adena. A visit to Adena is a trip you'll long remember. We're fortunate to still have the home of the father of Ohio statehood.
Okay. Whoops. Okay. So Sarah, you learned about her father. She was the second daughter of the 6th governor of Ohio. And like Emma, she was a very pious woman. She came from a devout Episcopalian household, though after many tours through Europe and meeting the Pope and spending time with nuns, she converted to Catholicism. I admire women who are deeply spiritual, and I think this fascinated me more than all the accomplishments she gained as a wealthy woman. However, as her father was our 6th governor, she lived a very privileged life. Yet it was simple all the same, as you can see from the furnishings that you just saw in the museum there. And when I toured the Adena mansion, which I wouldn't necessarily call a mansion compared to some of the other estates that I've toured in the world, it is more property than house, and the house seems more rustic to me than glamorous. The Adena estate does give you more of a sense, though, of what life was like for people in that time period. They do have they still have the barn that's there, and they have the creek. I mean not the creek. Shoot, I made a mistake. The spring house where they kept things cold when they didn't have refrigerators. So it was very good shape. The barn was very good shape, and the spring storage house is in good shape. And then the vegetable garden, probably a lot bigger when the family was living there, but it's still there, a vegetable garden that they keep up. In Winter We Flourish is the name of the book I was able to find when I left the Adena estate. A guide there made me aware of it, and so as soon as I left, I went and looked for it in a used bookstore. It's a horribly edited book, which I have to admit, but the writer kept calling Sarah Sally throughout one chapter, which kind of confused me. I thought that was her nickname for a minute there. And I kept going back to see, did she say that was her nickname? But no, she just didn't have it edited properly. But still, it was a great book nonetheless. And I continued to trudge on reading the book so I can learn all about her life, because there's so little that's written about women in history, especially here in Ohio. So it's been a big challenge for me. Her parents were very devoted to each other, as well as their service to the state of Ohio. Sarah began as a very precocious young lady, but a good child nonetheless, and they make jokes about that at the museum. She gave piano recitals and spoke 4 languages, Italian, German, and French, and that probably served her very well when she went to Europe. She married twice, and this was only because her first great love died. Her first marriage was to Edward King, and this was 5 days after her 16th birthday. He was an attorney in private practice and twice the Speaker of the House of Representatives. They had 5 children, but sadly only 2 of their boys survived. This was Tom and Rufus, and Tom actually died at the age of 31. So she did live a pretty tragic life. The family lived in Cincinnati, which is where her husband had his practice, her first husband. And this is where her philanthropic work began as well. It started in 1832 when she began to help the community after the Great Flood. And then later there was a cholera outbreak, and she nursed the sick in her very own home while her husband Edward was surviving malaria in another area of the house, just coming back from his travels. In 1833, she opened the Protestant Orphan Asylum, which was located in Mount Auburn. In 1836, her husband died, and so she devoted her years of mourning to her sons, whom she followed to Cambridge. As they were attending Harvard, she opened the upstairs room of her home to the boys and their fellow students so they could use it for study rooms and guest rooms. Her sons both opened their own law practices after graduation. One would be in Philadelphia and the other in Cincinnati, and they both married within a couple of years. At the age of 44, she would then marry again to William Peters, and he was a lot older than she was. They were married for almost 10 years until his death as well. And during this marriage, this is when she begins to offer a lot more support to women and children, and in between, she begins her journeys to Europe. What was important to her was helping women develop skills that would provide them with economic independence. She started a school for seamstresses, though this one struggled, the first one struggled, and it failed for unknown reasons. And then she opened a home for delinquent girls called the Rosine Association for Magdalens, which was actually a Quaker establishment. Though if any of you have heard of the movie, The Magdalene Sisters from Ireland, this was a Catholic school for delinquent girls, and I hope her school had a little bit more integrity than that one. And I'm pretty sure it did. From everything I've read about her, she seemed like a very wonderful person. In 1848, she opened the Philadelphia School of Design, and this was a women's trade school, which is still in existence today. The Moore College of Art and Design continues to be a women's only college, and it boasts the first only visual arts college in the US. And they do mention Sarah on their website that she founded the school. So after this college began, her son Tom died, and to deal with her grief, she continued traveling to Europe with his wife and children. She thought her husband would join her, but he was unable to, and by the time she returned, he died. She would return to Europe 6 more times and began one more school called the Ladies Academy of Fine Arts. I was unable to determine if it still exists under another name, unfortunately. But until her death at the age of 77, she turned her thoughts and financial resources to convents and the church. I didn't include her eulogy, but at the end of the book that was written about her in Winter We Flourish, they have included the eulogy, which is very beautiful, and it's very telling as to what kind of a person she really was and how people thought of her. So now we're going to switch gears and go to the youngest person that I'm going to be talking here about, and that is Mildred Wirt Benson, who wrote Nancy Drew mystery stories. And I don't know about some of you, but I'm quite sure probably a lot of you have read these books and were great fans of them when you were teenagers, like I was. So, but did you know that Mildred Wirt Benson, while she was not born in Ohio, she wrote the books here in Cleveland, Ohio. So she lived to be 96 years old, and in that time wrote 79 books, and 23 of these were from the Nancy Drew series. Carolyn King, was a pseudonym for her, but you can also see these other names up here that she also took as pseudonyms during her 79 book writing years. So the outline for Nancy Drew was established by Edward Stratemeyer in 1929. Edward ran a publishing house that he was famous for writing the dime store novels, and had came up with quite a number of quickie characters that had a series to go along with them, as well as pseudonyms, and contracted writers for each of them. Mildred was hired in 1929, and though the concept was his, she actually wrote and created all the details and storylines that make the Nancy Drew beloved heroine that we know about today. And then the writers who followed just kind of followed along in those guidelines. So as I mentioned, she was not born in Ohio. She came from Ladora, Iowa. And like Sarah Worthington, she was also married twice, and for the same reason. Her first husband had died. And both husbands were equally supportive of her lifestyle as a writer, just as Nancy's boyfriend, Ned Nickerson, supported her. And it sounds as if, however, her daughter Peggy did suffer somewhat of having a career mother. Ohio writer Julie K. Rabini states this in her book, Missing Millie Benson, that I had read, and stated that the mother-daughter relationship was challenging. And I imagine that's because in that time period, not a lot of women were career mothers. And so they didn't have people in society to back them up, and they didn't have other women to kind of be there to support them along the way. So it was probably a little tough for her to challenge writing and being a mother and being a wife. Before she was married, though, Mildred went to college first in 1922 in Iowa, and this is where she got her start as a writer on the Daily Iowan college newspaper. She also excelled on the swim team, just as Carson Drew respected Nancy. Her parents were very supportive of her with all of her pursuits. Also, like Nancy, whenever Mildred dealt with challenges or obstacles in life, she used her energy for something positive. In Mildred's case, it would be a hobby, such as getting her pilot's license when she got married the second time, and also starting another book series. So her first marriage was to Asa Wirt, which brought her to Cleveland, Ohio, and that's again where Nancy Drew was written. When Asa died, the second marriage was to the editor of the Toledo Blade, and his name was George Benson. She met George because she had gone to Toledo to work on his paper. As her daughter was an adult by now, she and George were able to live a much more adventurous lifestyle than she was able to have with Asa. In fact, when I was writing about Mildred, I began to confuse whether I was talking about Nancy or talking about Mildred, because their stories just kept going together. But that's partly because I think as a writer, we all tend to write biographies in our books. And this last slide I'll let you read is a poem that was written for her by her mother, Lillian Augustine, before she went off to college. So I'll give you a few minutes to read this. Okay. So the last person that we're going to be talking about today is the Honorable Maud C. Waite, and it's Maud Comstock Waite. I stumbled upon Maud when I took up the challenge of volunteering to write about a suffragist for the biographical database of NASA, which is National American Women's Suffragette Association. It's called suffragette, but in America, the women were actually called suffragists. And if you ever get confused, I always tell people to just remember, pull out your Mary Poppins CD and remember that song that was sung by the mother in Mary Poppins about being suffragettes. I asked, when I was writing for the NASA, I asked them, can you please give me somebody from Ohio? And they gave me two women. But Maud was the only one that I could find any information on, and I don't remember the other lady's name. But also, as I've mentioned before, taking on the task of researching women in Ohio's history is quite difficult because while we don't know their names, while we do know their names, not much has been written about these ladies. Maud was my first one to write about from scratch. There was no books, just articles. And this entailed going up to Cleveland, and I went and met with Jeannine, who at that time, a couple of years ago, was the curator at the Lakewood Historical Society. And Jess was kind enough to pull everything together for me that they had on Maud, which was greatly appreciated. She even gave me a table and chair, so I had my own little office to sift through all the archives and make copies to take home and read about. So I'm really, really appreciative of all the help that she gave me. And the second thing that I thought was very difficult about Maud is that her birthday, which happens to be 80 some years before I was born, on my same day, was that there was two women in the family that had the same birthday. And this is one of the things that I'm sure some of you who've done your research on Ancestry.com have found a lot of difficulties with birthdays and getting information to match up that makes sense. So I went and researched this through the county that the city that she was born in, Middlebury, Vermont, and it was forwarded to the Henry Sheldon Museum in Middlebury. and they were only able to find one birth certificate, which appeared to be her sister's birth certificate, Esther Maud. But it seems odd, but it's possible that there were two sisters with the same birthday, but her husband at the time of her death had a different birth year. And so it's really complicated. So you will see a couple of different birth years if you're researching Maud. So I just wanted to point that out to you. But Maud started out as a teacher and a principal in Middlebury, Vermont, before she and her husband and their daughter moved to Lakewood, Ohio, which is near Cleveland. I tried to find her last home in Cleveland while I was up there, but they've reorganized the street numbers, and some of the homes are the homes that are there are old, but they're newer than hers would have been. So I wasn't able to find that. Maud became very active in Lakewood and then Cleveland, and then in Cleveland with the Suffrage Association there. She would eventually chair the Lakewood Suffrage Association. So what else did she do? So these are all the things that she also accomplished during this time. The Women's City Club of Cleveland, the Citizens League of Cleveland, Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. So you can see a lot of these things here. The very last notable mention about Maud is that she was one of the 6 women elected to the Ohio General Assembly in 1922. The other 5 women were Nettie Mackenzie Clapp, Lulu Thomas Gleason, Nettie Bromley Lowhead, May Martin Van Wy, and Adelaide Sterling Oot. Maud was 44 years old, and she served 3 years during this time in office. And during that time, she sponsored 3 bills as well. The SB 130, which is the sale and conveyance of portions of Cleveland State Hospital. SB 138, which allows the State Medical Board to appoint visiting teachers for recognizing schools of nursing. And then the last one is SB 252, which it sounds like is still available today, and it's known as Lindsay's Law, which requires schools to prevent sudden cardiac arrest. And from what I can make out, she died while she was in her 3rd term. So that's my presentation for today. I'm going to leave you with a little song while you're writing down your questions that I found was very beautiful and touching.
Someone I know had a little red canoe. In it room for only 2. Love found its star, staying in my heart. I'm like a flower through, drifting with the current down a moonlit stream, while above the heavens in their glory gleam, and the stars on high twinkle in the sky, singing in a paradise of love divine, dreaming of a pair of eyes that looked in mine. Beautiful Ohio, in dreams again I see visions of what used to be.
I keep happening. Okay, so let's go to the questions and answers.
If anyone has any questions, type them into the Q&A box and we will get those answered.
Do I have any hints for researching women? Well, are you going to answer that, Samantha?
No, I just marked that you were answering it now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So to be diligent and to ask lots of questions when you're going to history museums, and ask if there were any women that were written about as far as the history of the museum that you're touring or the estate that you're touring. That's actually how, as I mentioned, that was how I found out about In Winter We Flourish when I was touring the Adena Mansion. I would also recommend just Google searching, and just what I started doing was I typed in Ohio women's history and I got something from Wikipedia, which gave me a long list of women. And I just started going down the list and typing in their names to see what kind of information would come up online. And then I'd go into Amazon and see if there was any books written about them. So just be diligent in your Google search and asking questions, but mainly getting information from your families about women in your families and asking questions about what they did so that you can find out about your grandmothers and great grandmothers. In fact, I just listened to something on NPR the other day, and Gloria Steinem was talking about her grandmother for a few minutes. And what's interesting is she actually didn't know anything about her grandmother until she became an adult. Her grandmother was a suffragist, and they were from Ohio, but the family kind of downplayed it while she was growing up. And it sounds like it was a pretty difficult childhood anyway, because her parents divorced early on. And so they were too busy focused on being single parents, and her mother was a career woman. So that was kind of interesting. So definitely make sure you find out about your own families. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I'll do my best to answer them. Any questions about any of the women that I presented? Did everybody already know about these women, or does anybody have anything to add about any of the women that I presented today? Your mute's on, Sarah.
Someone asked in the chat box if you talked with the Lakewood Historical Society.
Yes, I did talk to the Lakewood Historical Society. That was how I got the information on Maud Waite. And I had mentioned that Jessamine, what was her last name? Jessamine Yenny was the woman who helped me with that. She's not working there anymore, but that was the woman who helped me with that. And oh, okay, I am seeing some things on here. Oh, hi, Andy. Andy's saying that Emma is also the subject of a documentary. Thank you for reminding me, because I completely forgot about that. Yes, Eden Valley Enterprises made a documentary about Emma, and they would be mad at me that I forgot to mention that. So I'm so glad you put that in there. And they were up for an award for that as well. I think it was an Academy Award, if I'm correct. And they have a woman who plays her. And I saw the documentary at the Ohio History Connection a year or two ago. So it was really good. So yeah, thanks for saying that, Andy. And then he also included it looks like he included the link for that. Well, I guess we're ending a little bit early today.
Oh, there's another question
Oh, where?
in the Q&A.
Oh, okay, so there's two places. We have found researching women's suffrage difficult in the local newspaper. Hence, well, I would go to the Ohio History Connection up on the 4th floor, I think it is, the very last floor. They have a big library up there with an archive of the newspaper, and you can look up information on there. I would also research information from newspapers around the world, because I have seen quite a few bits and pieces of information about women's suffrage. Maud Waite, they had something about her in the newspaper that I found. There was quite a few clippings that Jessamine had given to me to read. So it's may not be listed as women's suffrage. It might just be listed as Cleveland Women's Group or something along those lines. But the historical societies are the best place, as well as the archives from the newspaper so far that I've found that have all the information. I feel like I'm not giving this the depth of an answer that it deserves, but I'm kind of trying to think really quick on the spot. So I apologize for that. The people at the library and the Ohio History Connection are very, very helpful though. And they really enjoy doing the work that they enjoy doing. The Columbus Museum, the Columbus Metropolitan Library has a genealogical section upstairs, and they have quite a few librarians there that are dedicated to help you with that, to looking up your own family history if you haven't been able to do that yet. Ancestry.com, Family Search, these are all ways of looking at things. And I've actually looked people up on Family Search because it's free. And that's how I found a little bit more information on Maud Waite. So if you can find the name, you just keep on going. There are many books written about women's history. I have quite a bit of a collection myself, and I have a few books that are written about Ohio women. There's a pioneer woman's book that I have on my shelf. Look to Lazarus, which talks a lot about women who got their jobs at Lazarus and some of the women who went up the ladder there. One of them was Les Wexner's mother, which kind of surprised me. I didn't realize she was a buyer at Lazarus. That's kind of how she got started with her career. So there are some good books like that. You just have to really work hard in researching. Do you have any suggestions, Sarah or Samantha? Any ideas that maybe I'm forgetting?
I know when we research suffrage at the Trumbull County Historical Society, we rely a lot on the Upton Association, and they focus on Harriet Taylor Upton, and they are kind of our go-to for suffrage research here. But yeah, as far as newspapers go, we don't rely too heavily on the newspapers that we have. Yeah, we rely on the Upton Association.
Yeah. So the historical societies are much better for you. I mean, the local places are much better for you in finding that information.
I can add too, for students when we have history day and we help them do their research, broadening out from just newspapers is always a good idea too, because sometimes newspapers tend to just hit those stories, right? That people are interested in because they're trying to sell copies. And so like Jeannine mentioned, broadening out to other resources that you can find at historical societies is always helpful too. So photographs, those birth and death records, any letters or diaries can help supplement those research that you're doing with newspapers.
Yeah, the diaries, that's always a good thing when somebody's lucky to find a diary that's suddenly resurfaced from somebody's attic or their basement. And that's a lot of times where they're coming from. So Connie is saying that the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame records are at the Ohio History Connection. And so good. So that's something interesting to know. And there is a place at the State House, a little room where they do feature some of the women who I mentioned earlier that were the 6 women. Where are their names at on this last page? The 6 women who were elected to the Ohio General Assembly in 1922. Also, when I went to the Supreme Court, I did some classes on mediation. And at the Ohio Supreme Court downtown, they have a library upstairs. It's a law library, but that's where you will find the Florence Ellenwood Allen. She wrote a book on a couple of books, but they're very difficult to find and extremely expensive. But her book is up there in that library. And then they have a lot of interesting things to look at around the Supreme Court building as well as women who are on the Supreme Court now. But the State House has a whole room dedicated to this. And so you might want to go in there and look at the different photos of all the different women who were elected to the General Assembly in 1922. Any other ideas or questions or suggestions? I'm sorry we ended early. It actually went a little longer when we taped this, but I think I was trying to go a little quicker this time so that we had more time for questions and answers. I thought there was going to be a lot more, but thank you so much to everybody who came out today for the Ohio Local History Alliance annual meeting. I'm so grateful to all of you who came to listen to my presentation this morning. Thank you, Joanne. I'm glad to hear that I gave you some resources and ideas. I'm usually a lot more talkative, hard to get me to shut up, but I'm trying to be more careful since we're online here and this is a new thing this year.
Yeah, so I guess we can wrap up early then. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Yeah, we hope you have a good rest of your sessions today, tomorrow, and Saturday.